I've worked Karath Station for 11 years. I've seen a lot of species come through those docking rings. Kreth traders with their 6 arms and their habit of sampling merchandise without asking. Veldai pilgrims who move so slow you'd swear they were made of stone. The Heth Collective, who travel in groups of 40 and somehow still manage to collide with everything. I've watched a Dorvian dignitary sneeze so hard it knocked a refreshment cart into the main corridor. I've seen a lot. But I had never seen a human in uniform until cycle 4471.88. And when I say I hadn't seen one, I mean that most of us on Karath hadn't. We knew about humans. Everyone in the hegemony knew about humans by then. They'd been a registered species for about 60 years at that point. Trading rights established. Diplomatic observer status granted. A modest presence in about a dozen systems. But they're military. They're actual uniformed service personnel. Nobody had really seen them up close. Not in a formal capacity. Not in a situation that mattered. The day started like every other day on the commerce deck. The environmental recyclers were cycling through their morning purge, which always made the air smell faintly of mineral wash for the first 2 hours. The upper promenade lights were still on their dawn setting, that soft amber that the station directors thought felt welcoming, but which mostly just made everyone look slightly ill. I was at the coordination desk reviewing the incoming manifest for berth 17 through 22 when my assistant, a young Veldai named Priyak, came and stood at my shoulder. Priyak didn't say anything, he just stood there. That was unusual. Priyak talked constantly. It was kind of his defining characteristic. I looked up from the manifest. He was staring at the arrival corridor for berths 19 and 20. I followed his eyeline. There were 4 of them walking down the corridor. 4 humans in uniform. Now, I want to be careful here because I know what some people expect me to say. People expect me to say they glowed, or there was something obviously supernatural about them, or that the moment I saw them, I felt a shift in the air. Stories like that always include some mystical detail that explains why everyone stopped and stared. The truth is more complicated and in some ways more interesting. They didn't look like what I expected. I'd seen human images in registry files, smooth, somewhat variable appearance, 2 standard genders on the visible spectrum, relatively small compared to most hegemony species, not obviously armored, not particularly threatening in the physiological sense, no natural weapons, no reinforced exoskeleton, no venom glands as far as anyone had documented. They were, in purely biological terms, one of the softer species in the hegemony registry. These 4 walked in a way that made you stop thinking about biology. I can't fully explain it, I've tried. The closest I can get is this: most beings, when they walk through a space, move around it. They navigate. They take the path of least resistance. They adjust their course based on what's in front of them. These 4 humans moved through the corridor as though the corridor existed for them, not arrogantly, not aggressively. There was no posturing. But their pace was absolutely steady. Their eyes moved constantly. They were talking quietly to each other and checking something on a small personal device, and not a single one of them adjusted their path for anything. The Kreth traders who were coming the other direction moved. They kind of melted to the side without anyone asking them to. A refreshment unit that had been blocking half the corridor got nudged out of the way by the lead human's hand. Not roughly, just firmly, the way you move something that shouldn't be where it is. They wore dark clothing, a deep green that was almost black in the amber lighting, insignia on the shoulders and chest that I didn't recognize, boots that made a very specific sound on the deck plating. I caught the arm of one of my cargo managers, a Heth named Asasas. "What are those?" Asasas had 7 of his compound eyes, tracking the 4 figures. "I believe," he said slowly, "those are human soldiers." "Have you seen one before?" "I have not." Does it worry you? He was quiet for a moment. The four humans had stopped near berth 20 to consult with a station directory terminal. The lead one was speaking to the terminal in standard hegemony trade language, accent present but perfectly comprehensible. Not exactly worry, Asasas finally said. More like the feeling I get when the station's structural monitors log a pressure variance. It's not an alarm, it's a flag, something to pay attention to. That's about the best description I've ever heard for what it felt like that morning. Something to pay attention to. Personal Journal of Staff Sergeant DeMarco Webb, 3rd Expeditionary Liaison Group, Earth Diplomatic Escort Command. Entry recovered from personal data drive, shared with permission of family. I'll be honest, I didn't really know what to expect from Karath Station. The briefing packages they gave us before deployment were thorough in the way that briefing packages always are. Long, detailed, and somehow not quite useful when you're actually standing there. We knew the station layout in terms of square footage and berth arrangement. We knew the major species populations and their diplomatic status relative to Earth. We knew the hegemony protocols for uniformed military visitors, which mostly amounted to: don't touch anything religious, don't make direct eye contact with a Veldai elder for more than 3 seconds, and for the love of everything holy, don't try to shake hands with a Dorvian because their secondary arms are not hands. What the briefing didn't prepare me for was the atmosphere, the actual feeling of it. Karath Station is enormous. I'd worked a joint exercise on the European orbital platform once, and I thought that was big. Karath makes it look like a shuttle bay. It orbits a Jovian-class gas giant in the outer spiral, which means the light that comes through the observation panels is this deep burnt orange that shifts through the cycle. The ceilings in the main commercial sector are something like 40 meters up. The corridors are wide enough to drive a convoy through. The smell is a combination of about 600 different biological metabolisms, all processing atmosphere through a common recycling system, which means it doesn't smell bad exactly, but it doesn't smell right either. There were alien beings everywhere. And I mean everywhere. My team was 4, myself, Corporal Adiz Akafer, Corporal Sven Lindqvist, and Private First Class Jaihun Yoon. We were on escort assignment for Ambassador Delacroix, who was attending a 3-day hegemony trade mediation. We were not anticipating any significant security concerns. This was a diplomatic event, routine as these things go. I remember walking down the arrival corridor and feeling the stares. I'm from Chicago. I'm black, I'm 6'1", I've got a face that my mother calls distinguished and everyone else calls intimidating. I'm used to being looked at, but this was different. It wasn't hostility. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like the way people look at something they're trying to figure out. Akafer leaned toward me while we were consulting the directory. Webb, she said quietly. Yeah. They're all staring. I know. Every single one of them. I know, Akafer. Is that normal? I looked around. The stares weren't aggressive. They were just total. Every alien face in sight was pointed at us with this particular kind of concentration. I think, I said, we might be a novelty. Lindqvist, who was from somewhere in Sweden, and had the disposition of a man who'd seen everything and been impressed by none of it, glanced up from his sector map. I feel like an animal at a zoo, he said. Welcome to the galaxy, I told him. Testimony of Ambassador Colette Delacroix, Earth Diplomatic Corps. For context, I had been Earth's trade observer in the hegemony for 9 years before the Karath mediation. I'd attended 17 formal hegemony sessions. I'd shaken 17 kinds of alien hands, tentacles, and appendages. I'd eaten alien food at state dinners and drunk alien fermentation beverages at diplomatic receptions, and once, memorably, participated in a Veldai greeting ceremony that involved 3 hours of synchronized breathing. I knew the hegemony's opinion of humans. We were welcomed. We were tolerated. We were, diplomatically speaking, treated with the kind of careful, deliberate consideration that large institutions give to small but promising new members. The way a century-old firm might treat a promising recent hire. We'll let you in the room but don't expect to lead the meeting. What I did not know, until Karath, was the hegemony's opinion of our military specifically. The hegemony had a military, the Galactic Combined Defense Force, or GCDF. It was old, established, and large. It had a complex hierarchy with ranking systems that predated most member species' written histories. It had won several major conflicts across recorded hegemony history, and was generally regarded as the most powerful military structure in the explored galaxy. Earth had sent 4 soldiers and asked for observer access to the diplomatic proceedings. The hegemony had, I later learned, found this mildly puzzling. Not offensive, not presumptuous, just puzzling. 4 humans in uniform at a trade mediation. What was the strategic significance? What were 4 humans expected to accomplish? I heard afterward that the GCDF senior observer present, a commander named Rhett Cal of the Dorvian contingent, had said to his aide, before the incident, something along the lines of, "The humans are very committed to their rituals of military presence. It's rather touching." He did not say that afterward. Testimony of Priyak, Administrative Assistant, Karath Station Commerce Coordination. I know my supervisor Lissa has already told this part of the story, so I will try not to repeat what she said. But I want to add something she may have left out, because Lissa is very professional and tends to leave out the parts where she herself was visibly affected. When the 4 human soldiers walked past our coordination desk, the lead one, the large, dark-skinned male, the one who turned out to be Staff Sergeant Webb, he glanced over at us. Just a brief look. He was checking the space as he passed, doing what I later learned they call reading a room. Just a fast, professional scan. And he made eye contact with Lissa for exactly 1 second. He nodded. Not a bow, not a formal greeting, just a nod. The kind of acknowledgement that says, "I see you, I know you're there, we're good." And Lissa, who has worked this station for 11 years and is not easily unsettled, she nodded back. And then she stood very still for a moment with an expression I can only describe as recalibrating. I asked her later what it was like. She said, it was like being acknowledged by something that could eat you but had chosen not to. Which I thought was both colorful and quite precise. Hegemony GCDF Field Report, Commander Rhett Cal, Dorvian Contingent. Translated from Dorvian Formal Script, Certified Translation, Archivist Velthana. Note, the following was filed as a standard pre-incident report. It is included for contrast with Commander Rhett Cal's post-incident report, which is filed separately in this archive. Security Assessment for the Karath Trade Mediation, Cycle 4471.88. Station security is standard and sufficient. The GCDF contingent of 12 soldiers is appropriately positioned and briefed. No significant threat assessment has been raised by intelligence protocols. Earth has submitted a request for 4 military observers to attend. This has been approved. The Earth military observers are to be extended standard diplomatic courtesy and assigned positions appropriate to their rank and role. It is worth noting that Earth's military doctrine is not extensively documented in hegemony intelligence. Earth has been a member species for 60 years, but has, to this point, engaged primarily in economic and cultural exchange rather than military cooperation. Their combat history is, of course, extensively documented. Earth has an unusually conflict-rich internal history relative to species of comparable development age, but translating historical internal combat data to current tactical assessment is imprecise. In layman's terms, we know humans have fought each other with considerable commitment. We don't have reliable data on how they perform in situations of actual consequence. We will observe. Commander Rhett Cow, Cycle 4471.88 Morning. Personal Journal of Staff, Sergeant DeMarco Webb. Entry continued. The ambassador's first full day of mediation was scheduled to begin at midday station time. We had several hours to get situated, learn the layout from the station schematic we'd been given, and do a proper walkthrough of the venues. I want to explain what a protection detail walkthrough looks like to people who maybe haven't seen it. It's not like in the movies where you stride through a space looking cool. It's methodical. It's a series of decisions about sightlines and choke points and cover positions and extraction routes. You're building a mental map that overlays the physical one. You're looking at every room and asking, if something goes wrong here, what do I do? Most of the time the answer is, nothing goes wrong. You do a thorough walkthrough, you brief your team, you establish positions, you stand where you're supposed to stand, and the event proceeds without incident, and then you go home. Akaffer is the best walkthrough person I've ever worked with. She has a memory like a building schematic. She walks a space once and she can redraw it for you in the dark. She also has a quality that I consider essential in a protection detail. She is very, very calm. Not the kind of calm that comes from not caring. The kind that comes from having already processed every scenario and decided how to respond. She doesn't need to think in the moment because she's already thought everything through. Lindqvist is different. He processes out loud. During the walkthrough, he kept making small, quiet comments. Secondary exit behind the service counter. Ceiling structure could support a concealed position there. That refreshment terminal has a direct sightline to the podium, needs to be factored. Not for the group's benefit, just processing. Yoon was quiet. He always was. He had eyes like a hawk and moved so efficiently that some people found it unsettling. He'd been recruited from the ROK Marine Corps and had a set of physical skills that I tried not to think too hard about because they made me feel slightly inadequate. We did our walkthrough. We filed our route assessments. We submitted our position requests to the station security coordinator, a Heth woman named Osas Vareth who was professional and organized, and received our documentation with the polite but faintly condescending efficiency that I was starting to recognize as the hegemony's default setting for humans. She approved our positions. She noted that the GCDF contingent would have primary security jurisdiction. She said we were welcome to observe and assist if needed. She said assist in a particular way. The way you say assist when you mean stay out of the way. I noted it. I didn't say anything. We had our assignment and it was clear. Ambassador Delacroix's safety. That was it. That was the whole job. I didn't need jurisdiction or authority or a hegemony security commander's respect. But I noted it. Testimony of Osas Vareth, Station Security Coordinator, Karath Station. I want to say, before anything else, that I have revised my assessment. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like the statement of someone covering their professional record. It's not. I was wrong about what the human soldiers were and what they were capable of, and I acknowledge that clearly and without reservation, because the incident that followed demonstrated it in terms that do not leave room for ambiguity. But I want to explain what my assessment was based on, because it wasn't arbitrary prejudice. It was data. The hegemony GCDF soldiers I had worked with over my career were enormous by most species standards. Dorvians average 2.5 meters and have a natural exoskeletal layer equivalent to light armor. Kreth soldiers have 6 prehensile limbs, 3 of which can serve as weapons. Veldai, while slow, are essentially impervious to standard kinetic projectiles due to their cellular density. The physical baseline of a hegemony soldier is, in most cases, well above the average biological upper limit. Humans are not physically exceptional by hegemony standards. I say this not as an insult but as a structural reality. They are baseline bipeds with average biological capabilities. Their strength is significant for their size but not extraordinary in a galactic context. Their speed is moderate. Their sensory range is limited. So when 4 of them arrived and I reviewed their credentials and their assigned role, my honest professional assessment was decorative, ceremonial, a cultural gesture from a species that takes military ritual seriously. I gave them positions with good sightlines to make them feel useful. I did not expect to need them. I want to say that clearly. I did not expect to need them. Personal Journal of Staff, Sergeant DeMarco Webb. Entry continued. By the time the mediation session was underway, we had our positions established. HFY was by the main entrance to the mediation chamber, which was a large circular room in the station's diplomatic quarter, high ceilings, curved walls, a central conference arrangement surrounded by observer rings. I was at the ambassador's immediate left. Lindqvist had the secondary entrance on the far side. Yoon was on the observer ring's upper level, which gave him a complete sightline to the floor. The chamber was full. I won't pretend I knew what they were all talking about. The mediation was in hegemony trade standard, which I had functional but not expert level. I caught maybe 60% of the content. Something about shipping corridor allocation in the outer spiral and tariff structures for biomaterial transport. The ambassador was focused and composed. She was good at her job. The two sides, some kind of mercantile consortium and a hegemony development authority, were disagreeing about something involving root rights. I wasn't listening to the substance. I was doing what I always do, watching the room, tracking movement, reading the energy. About 90 minutes in, the energy changed. I don't know how to explain it better than that. Nothing happened that I could point to and say, that's when it changed. But the quality of the room shifted, a kind of density in the air. A particular quality of silence that you get when something is about to happen. I checked HFY. She had noticed it too. I could tell by the way she'd straightened almost imperceptibly. I looked at the main entrance. 3 beings had entered that I hadn't seen before. They were large, larger than the standard Dorvian GCDF soldiers. They wore different insignia, not the standard GCDF stripe pattern. Something else. Something that didn't match any of the diplomatic delegations I'd been briefed on. They moved to a position along the wall. They stood there. They weren't doing anything that looked overtly threatening, but they weren't part of any arrangement I'd been briefed on. I checked my comm unit quietly. Sent a text format flag to Lindqvist. 3 unscheduled main wall unknown insignia. Confirm. His response came back in 20 seconds. Confirmed. 2 more secondary entrants. Same insignia, 5 total, not on the roster. 5 unscheduled individuals with matching insignia, who weren't on any roster I'd seen. I reported immediately to OSS Varith through the security channel. Her response was measured. She would investigate. They were likely a late diplomatic addition. This happened at hegemony events. Protocol adjustments were common. I acknowledged. I didn't stand down. Testimony of Lissa Vornereth. I wasn't in the mediation chamber. Commerce Deck doesn't interface with the diplomatic quarter directly. But I heard what was happening within about 15 minutes of it starting, because Karath Station gossip travels at approximately 3 times the speed of light, and my entire department comm channel became a stream of fragmented real-time updates from people who were near the diplomatic quarter. The fragments didn't make much sense at first. Something with the unscheduled delegation. The humans are not standing down. GCDF commander is telling them to step back. They are not stepping back. That last one got my attention. Personal Journal of Staff, Sergeant DeMarco Webb. Entry continued. So here's what actually happened, because I've heard several versions of this story now, and most of them have things wrong. About 20 minutes after I flagged the unscheduled individuals, OSS Vareth came back on the channel and told me she had spoken to their credentials coordinator and they were cleared. They were an observer delegation from something called the Provisional Trade Security Alliance, a new member consortium. Late edition, credentials verified through a secondary channel. I acknowledged. I still didn't stand down. I want to be clear about why. It wasn't a feeling. It wasn't some mysterious instinct. It was a specific set of observable details that, taken individually, could each be explained away, but taken together created a pattern I didn't like. Detail 1. None of the 5 individuals had made any kind of introduction or acknowledgement to the host delegation. When an observer group arrives late to a formal hegemony proceeding, there is a standard protocol acknowledgement. These 5 had skipped it. Maybe they didn't know it. Maybe they were new, but they'd skipped it. Detail 2. Their positioning was unusual. Observer groups take positions in the outer rings. These 5 had established themselves against the main wall in a configuration that, if I mapped it against the conference floor, created a kind of bracket around the section where the Hegemony Development Authority's primary delegates were seated. Not around the whole room, just that section. Detail 3, which was the one that really settled it for me. One of the 5 individuals had shifted position twice since arriving. Each shift was small, a step to the left, a half turn. But both shifts had refined the bracket, tightened it. That's not how observers move. That's how people establishing fields of fire move. I sent a direct text to HFY, I don't like the 5. She sent back, neither do I, waiting on your call. I sent to Lindqvist, stay on your entrance, do not let it close. To Yoon, top level, watch the 5, flag any hand movement. Then I stepped closer to Ambassador Delacroix, not dramatically, just close the gap from 2 meters to 1. She noticed, she glanced at me. I kept my face neutral, gave her the smallest possible headshake. Not alarm, just stay focused, something's happening, I've got it. She returned her attention to the mediation. That's the thing about working with a good diplomat. They trust their security. She didn't flinch, didn't react, didn't draw attention to anything. She just kept doing her job. That's when Commander Ritkal approached me. Testimony of Commander Ritkal, GCDF, Dorvian Contingent. Post-incident statement, translated from Dorvian formal script. I want to correct something that has appeared in several second-hand accounts of this incident. I did not tell the human soldier to get out of the way. I told him that the situation was under GCDF authority and that his team's repositioning was unnecessary. That is a distinction. However, I will acknowledge that the human Staff Sergeant Webb did not comply, and that in retrospect, his non-compliance was operationally correct. This is a difficult thing for me to put in a statement, because I am a GCDF commander with 31 cycles of service, and the human soldier had been on Karath Station for less than a day. The idea that his tactical read of the situation was more accurate than mine is professionally uncomfortable. But it was. He told me, in very direct terms, that he had 5 unscheduled individuals in concerning positions, and that he was repositioning his team to cover the primary diplomatic cluster. He said this quietly, without aggression, with the particular quality of calm that I now associate specifically with Earth military personnel, as though he was reporting a routine status update. I told him that GCDF had the situation assessed, and that the 5 individuals had cleared credentials. He looked at me. He said, Commander, with respect, cleared credentials through a secondary channel, unusual positioning, non-standard bracket formation around 1 delegation section, and 2 position refinements since arrival. I'm not suggesting GCDF is wrong. I'm suggesting we cover the contingency. We're not in each other's way. Then he stepped back to his position. He didn't wait for my approval. I want to be honest. My first reaction was irritation. My second reaction was to look at the 5 individuals with the specific attention that the human's description had drawn, and see the bracket he was describing. My third reaction was to quietly tell my second to check the bracket formation. My fourth reaction, about 90 seconds later, was to hear my second confirm that yes, the formation was consistent with a pre-action coverage position. By then, the incident had already begun. Personal Journal of Staff, Sergeant DeMarco Webb. Entry continued. I always have trouble with this part when I tell the story, not because it's hard to remember, because it happened so fast that sequential description makes it sound slower and more deliberate than it was. It wasn't deliberate, it was reflex. The first movement came from the 2 at Lindqvist's entrance, not toward the conference floor. They moved toward the secondary entrance itself, which I realized was because they intended to close it, cut off that exit. If you're going to do something to a group of people in a room, you want the exits controlled first. Lindqvist was already in the way. He didn't step aside. He said afterward that he just planted his feet. That's all. He'd assessed the situation the same way I had, gotten my message about the entrance, and when the 2 figures moved toward it, he was already standing in the single narrowest point of the secondary corridor, which meant they couldn't get past him without going through him. They were bigger than Lindqvist by a considerable margin, but Lindqvist is from a part of Sweden where the winters last 8 months, and apparently this produces a particular kind of stubborn that I've never seen in anyone else. He planted his feet, crossed his arms, and said in hegemony trade standard, "I'm going to need you to stop." They stopped. I don't think they expected that. On my side, the first active signal was the individual in the center of the bracket group reaching towards something at his belt. He was fast, but Yoon was already watching his hands from the upper level, and Yoon doesn't need much warning. What Yoon did, and I still think about this, because it was both extremely effective and technically only possible because of who Yoon is, was drop from the upper observer ring to the main floor in a single movement. The height difference was about 4 meters. He landed between the bracket individual and the hegemony delegation like he'd just stepped down from a curb. Then he put himself in the path of whatever the bracket individual had been reaching for and said pleasantly, "Hi, let's not." The chamber went very quiet. The bracket individual did not complete his reach. Akafer had already moved to the main entrance. She was blocking it the same way Lindqvist had taken the secondary. 5 feet 4 inches of absolute stillness that somehow occupied the entire doorframe. I had Ambassador Delacroix behind me and one of the hegemony delegates who had been in the direct center of the bracket beside me. I hadn't planned to cover the delegate, but he was there, and he was the target, so I covered him too. The GCDF soldiers moved in about 30 seconds after we'd already resolved the immediate situation. 30 seconds is a long time in this context. It's not a criticism. They hadn't been watching the same things we'd been watching. They reacted well once they understood what was happening. The 5 individuals were detained. It turned out they were connected to a corporate faction that had a serious grievance with the Hegemony Development Authority's route allocation decisions. Specifically, they stood to lose a significant portion of a transport network to a new hegemony-aligned competitor. This was, apparently, their solution to that problem. Their solution did not work out. Testimony of OSS Varith, Station Security Coordinator. I reviewed the security feed afterward, multiple times. From the moment Staff Sergeant Webb flagged the 5 individuals to the moment the last one was in restraints, 11 minutes passed. In those 11 minutes, the 4 human soldiers repositioned 4 times collectively, established blocking positions on both exits, covered the primary target cluster, intervened in a reaching action before it completed, and maintained constant nonverbal coordination with each other that I could observe but not fully interpret in real time. The GCDF commander on the floor took approximately 7 minutes to arrive at the same threat assessment the human soldier had flagged in the first minute. I want to address the positioning issue because it matters. The reason the GCDF soldiers were slower to respond was not incapability, it was positioning, my positioning. I had placed the GCDF soldiers in the standard ceremonial distribution, which looks appropriate for a diplomatic event and is correct for threat deterrence in a known threat scenario. But in an unknown threat emergence scenario, which is what this was, ceremonial distribution is too spread to coordinate efficiently. The 4 humans were not in ceremonial distribution. They were in what I later identified as a close protection formation, which is specifically designed for unknown threat emergence in a mixed civilian environment. It's faster, tighter, and much better suited to exactly the kind of situation that unfolded. They'd walked in, assessed the space, identified their priorities, and placed themselves correctly for a threat scenario that hadn't happened yet. I placed them in positions I thought were appropriate, because I thought they were decorative. I was wrong on both counts. Testimony of Ambassador Colette Delacroix. I want to give the perspective that I think gets left out of security incident accounts. I was the one being protected. When DeMarco stepped in front of me, I felt it before I saw it. There's something about the quality of movement when a trained protector positions between you and a threat. It's very specific. It's not a jump or a lunge. It's more like a wall deciding to exist. Smooth and completely certain. I've had security details for 9 years in this role. I know what that movement feels like. DeMarco has that quality to an unusual degree. He doesn't create alarm. He creates the feeling that alarm is something that happens in another room. What I remember most, though, is the moment afterward, when the 5 individuals were in restraints and the GCDF soldiers had secured the space, and the chamber was full of the particular kind of noisy silence that follows a near crisis. Everyone speaking at once, assessing, recounting. DeMarco stepped back from me to his standard 2-meter position. He looked at his team. Akafor was speaking quietly to Lindqvist. Yoon had returned to the upper level, though I genuinely cannot tell you when he went back up. They exchanged a series of looks and small gestures, a kind of debrief in the language they developed over however many deployments together. Then DeMarco looked at me and said, "You good, Ambassador. Not the situation is resolved or the threat has been neutralized, just you good." And I said yes, and he nodded, and that was it. I thought about that for a long time afterward, the economy of it, 9 words between the moment it ended and the moment we all moved forward. No ceremony, no self-congratulation, just checking. Testimony of a delegate name withheld by request, Hegemony Development Authority. I was in the center of the target cluster. I know that now. I did not know it during the incident. I was listening to a tariff dispute about biomaterial shipping and thinking about whether the station's dining options had anything compatible with my dietary requirements. And then there was suddenly a human soldier standing next to me, and I thought for a confusing moment that something had gone wrong with my place in the session. And then I looked at the human's face, and I understood that nothing had gone wrong with the session. Something had gone wrong with the room, and this human had decided that whatever it was going to stop before it reached me. He didn't know me. I was a bureaucrat from a development authority he'd probably never heard of, representing a species he'd interacted with for maybe 12 hours. I had done nothing to deserve protection. I wasn't even his assignment. But he covered me anyway. When the GCDF commander thanked him afterward, which took some visible effort from the commander, I will note, the human just said, it was the right cover position, as though it was purely tactical, as though he hadn't just put himself between me and someone who was reaching for a weapon. Maybe it was purely tactical. But I've thought about it since, and I think the tactics and the choice were the same thing. He'd trained until the right thing to do and the instinctive thing to do were indistinguishable from each other. Isn't that what it means to be a warrior, when the values and the reflexes are the same thing? I don't know, I'm a bureaucrat, not a philosopher. But I know what it felt like to have him standing there. Testimony of Corporal Adiz Akafar, 3rd Expeditionary Liaison Group. Can I tell a small story inside the bigger story? I think it's relevant. About 6 hours after the incident, after all the statements and the security reviews and the formal debrief with OSS Varith and the GCDF, the 4 of us were in the small crew lounge that had been assigned to our team near berth 19. Lindqvist was doing the specific kind of stretching he always does after a significant adrenaline event. Yoon was cleaning his boots, which he also always does after significant adrenaline events. I was writing my personal after-action notes. DeMarco was sitting at the small table in the center of the room, and he was doing something I'd seen him do after every significant incident in the years I'd known him. He was very still, eyes open, not on anything specific, just present. I've asked him about it before. He says he's reviewing, going through every decision point, checking what held up and what he'd do differently. He says it's important to do it while the details are still sharp. But watching him do it, this large, very capable, very steady man, sitting perfectly still in a storage room-sized crew lounge on an alien space station, 600 light-years from Earth, in the aftermath of something that could have gone very wrong, there was something in his face that was almost quiet, not relieved, not proud, just present. I asked him once if it ever bothered him, carrying the responsibility. He thought about it for a while. It's not about carrying it, he said. It's about being the thing that stands between the harm and the person. That's the whole job. You don't carry that. You just are it when it's time. I wrote that down. I still have it. Testimony of Archivist Velthana, Unified Historical Bureau. Note, the following is my own account, included at the request of the Archive Commission. I was present as a documentation observer for the mediation proceedings. I have spent my career collecting and preserving testimony about significant events in hegemony history. I am experienced in the documentation of what we term species-defining moments, events that change how a civilization understands itself or how others understand it. I did not initially believe that the Kareth incident would qualify as such a moment. It was a security incident. Significant, yes, but the hegemony has a long history of diplomatic security incidents. We have thousands of them on record. Most are footnotes. What made me revise that assessment was not the incident itself, but the aftermath. Specifically, what happened in the hours following it. The alien delegation leaders began doing something I had not seen before in 30 years of documentation work. They began asking questions about the humans, not politely curious questions of the kind that species exchange during cultural contact, questions with a specific character, questions that revealed a recalibration in progress. I heard a Kreth trade envoy ask OSS Varith. They came from a planet, yes, not a military installation. From a planet that still has weather and exposed surface, and no orbital defense beyond the atmospheric layer. OSS Varith confirmed this. The Kreth envoy was quiet for a moment. And they developed this, he said, not quite a question, more like the end of a thought process. I heard a Veldai senior pilgrim who had been one of the observers in the chamber say to her companion, "They did not look afraid, not at any point. I was watching. I would have seen it." Her companion said, "What do you suppose they feel when they do this?" And the senior pilgrim said, very quietly, "I think they feel like themselves." And Commander Rhett Cal, in the formal debrief, said something that I have quoted in 3 subsequent archive documents, because I think it is among the more precise assessments I have on record. The GCDF has soldiers with superior biological capability, centuries of combined tactical doctrine, and the most advanced equipment in the explored galaxy. The four humans had a week of briefing documents and familiarity with each other, but they were not thinking about capabilities or equipment. They were thinking about the room, about the people in it, about what needed to happen. The GCDF soldiers were thinking about the threat. The humans were thinking about the outcome. That is not a small difference. Personal Journal of Staff, Sergeant DeMarco Webb. Entry continued. Later that night, middle of the station night cycle, the lights had shifted to their deep blue rest setting. I was awake. I do this after operations. I'm not an anxious person by nature, but something in my head needs to run back over the whole thing when the day is done. Akafer thinks it's me building the mental archive. Lindqvist says it's what keeps me from being surprised. Yoon has never commented on it because Yoon was asleep approximately 4 minutes after his head touched the pillow. I was thinking about the bracket formation. About the moment I'd seen that second positional shift and the picture had assembled itself. About the 11 minutes from flag to resolution. About whether I'd gotten the timing right on covering the delegate, whether I should have pulled him toward the rear wall instead of shielding from where I stood. There's always something to review. And then I thought about something the ambassador had said to me during the formal dinner that the station had organized after the debrief. She'd leaned over quietly and said, "DeMarco, the Development Authority delegate wanted me to pass something to you. He said to tell you, and I'm going to do my best with the translation, that in his culture, there is a concept that roughly corresponds to you who stand in the path of what should not pass. He wanted you to know he considers you that." She said the Hegemony Trade Translation Office had a hard time with the exact phrase. The closest parallel in human language was something like guardian, but with an older, heavier weight to it. Like the word included not just the action but the entire life philosophy behind it. I lay there in the blue station light thinking about that. My father was a police officer. His father was a soldier. I have 2 cousins currently serving, an aunt who did 20 years in the Navy, a family tradition, people say. Like it's something you inherit, like eye color or the shape of your nose. But I don't think it's inherited. I think it's chosen. Every generation chooses it again. Every individual chooses it again. You choose to be the thing that stands between the harm and the person. You choose it in basic training when you're exhausted and your feet are destroyed and someone is yelling at you, and you think about quitting and you don't. You choose it again in the field when everything is uncertain and your options are bad, and the people depending on you have no idea how bad the options are. You choose it every day in small ways, until the choice and the reflex are the same thing. Earth didn't send generals to Karath. Earth sent 4 soldiers doing their jobs. And maybe that's the thing. Maybe what the hegemony didn't understand about humans isn't that we're fierce or tough or uniquely capable. Maybe what they didn't understand is that, for a certain kind of human, the kind that puts on a uniform and walks into the unknown without flinching, this is just a Tuesday. We've been doing this since before we had ships. Since before we had guns. Since before we had anything except the knowledge that someone had to stand in the path of what should not pass. The galaxy is larger than anything we'd imagined. But the job is the same. Part 2. Archive subsection, Secondary Testimony. Collected in the 30-day period following the Karath incident. Filed. Cycle 4471.92 through 4471.99. Testimony of Merchant Captain Yuva Reth, Kreth Trading Collective. I had been in berth 22 during the incident. I wasn't in the diplomatic quarter. I heard about it through the station communication network, the same as most people. But I want to provide context about what happened in the days afterward, because I think the incident's significance is only fully visible through what followed it. I have been trading in the outer spiral for 40 years. I have dealt with approximately 24 species in that time. I have never been what you would call a student of military affairs. I'm a merchant. I care about route security, tariff rates, and whether my cargo gets where it's going without being interfered with. But even I noticed what happened in the days after Karath. The conversations changed. On trading vessels, in station lounges, in cargo dock queues, the conversations changed. The topic of humans came up with a frequency and a seriousness that I had not heard before, and the nature of the conversations was specific. People weren't discussing human culture or human trade capacity or human diplomatic presence, which had been the normal framing. They were discussing what humans could do under pressure, what humans were like when it mattered. I heard a Veldai cargo supervisor say to her loading crew, "Did you hear what the 4 humans did? There were 12 GCDF soldiers there. They're the ones who caught it." I heard a Heth merchant ask a station vendor, "Is it true that one of them jumped from a 4-meter height and just stood there, like it was nothing?" I heard a senior Dorvian factor say to his trade partner, "I've had 3 GCDF escorts for major transfers. I'm going to look into what it takes to get a human detail." That last one hit me, because this particular Dorvian factor is not a person given to impulsive statements. He's one of the most methodical traders in the outer spiral. He'd been doing business in the hegemony for 60 years. He didn't say things like that without thinking them through. I thought something has shifted. Testimony of LT. Commander Rasavel, GCDF Intelligence Division. Filed as official intelligence assessment, declassified for archive inclusion. The Karath incident prompted a formal intelligence review of human military capability. I was tasked with leading that review. What follows is the unclassified summary. Earth's military history is, by galactic standards, anomalous. The species has been in continuous armed conflict in various forms for its entire documented history. This has produced a military culture unlike anything in the hegemony's experience. Most species develop military capacity as a response to external threat. They need to defend against something, so they build a defense. The military is a specialized structure, maintained for specific purposes, and manned by a portion of the population trained for those purposes. Earth's military history shows a different pattern. The conflict was internal for most of their development, which means the military is not a specialized structure maintained against an external threat. It's something that emerged from the species itself, refined over thousands of years of human against human conflict. This has implications. First, their tactics are not developed against theoretical external threats. They are developed against other humans who are also developing tactics. This creates an evolutionary pressure loop. Human tactics had to be good enough to defeat other humans using human tactics. It's a recursive optimization process that has been running for millennia. Second, the psychological profile of human soldiers is shaped by a culture in which warfare is a fundamental aspect of species identity. Not the only aspect, not the defining one necessarily, but a present one. Human children grow up in cultures with military traditions, military narratives, military histories. The concept of the warrior is embedded in their cultural substrate in ways that have no parallel among current hegemony species. Third, and this is the one I want to emphasize because it surprised even me, human soldiers are trained for uncertainty, for conditions where the situation is unknown and the options are limited. Their doctrine explicitly values individual judgment, initiative, and decision-making under incomplete information. This is unusual. Most hegemony military doctrine, including GCDF, is built on comprehensive information frameworks. You gather intelligence, you assess, you deploy with a clear picture of the situation. Human doctrine, at the individual level, is built on the assumption that you will not have a clear picture, and it trains individuals to be effective anyway. This is what happened at Karath. Staff Sergeant Webb did not have complete information. He had partial observations, a pattern recognition assessment, and a commitment to covering the contingency. He acted on that. He was right. I've reviewed the full event documentation 4 times now. The detail I keep returning to is the 11-minute gap between Webb's initial flag and the GCDF's threat confirmation. 11 minutes in which the GCDF was still assessing, and the 4 humans were already positioned. In military assessment terms, that gap is the whole story. Testimony of Corporal Sven Lindqvist, 3rd Expeditionary Liaison Group. I've given formal statements about this already, and I don't want to repeat them. The formal statements cover what happened. What I want to talk about is the part that I keep getting asked about and that I don't feel is properly understood. People ask me, what was it like when those 2 individuals moved toward the entrance and you stopped them? And I understand why they ask, because the account always sounds very dramatic. 2 very large aliens moving toward a door, and 1 human blocking them. But from inside it wasn't dramatic. It was just obvious. The door needed to stay open. I was at the door, so I stayed there. That's the whole calculation. There wasn't some moment of heroic decision. I just didn't move. I think people who haven't done this kind of work imagine there's a moment where you choose to be brave, where you gather yourself and decide to face the thing. But that's not how training works. Training works by replacing the choice with a condition. I am at the door. The door stays open. These 2 sentences are connected in a way that doesn't leave space for fear to insert itself. Does that mean I'm fearless? No, I'm not fearless. I'm from a small Swedish town and I'm afraid of spiders for what it's worth. I'm afraid of the ocean at night. I'm afraid of failing people I'm responsible for. But in that corridor with those 2 individuals moving toward me, fear wasn't in the equation. The equation was just, I'm here, this stays open. What do I do with my feet? I planted them. That's it. I'm aware that on the security feed it looks like something else. I've seen the clip. I know that from outside it looks like this moment of calm defiance, this human standing his ground against things twice his size. And I'm not going to pretend there isn't some part of me that is appropriately proud of how that looks. But from inside it was just, I'm here. That's what training does. It makes I'm here a complete answer. Testimony of Private First Class Jae-Hun Yoon, 3rd Expeditionary Liaison Group. I'm going to be honest. People's reaction to the jump thing was a little strange for me. I'm not being dismissive. I understand why it's notable from the outside. 4 meters is significant, and landing quietly and precisely at high speed in a mixed-species diplomatic chamber is visually striking. I accept that. But the reason I could do that is not that I'm extraordinary. The reason I could do that is that I've done it approximately 10,000 times in training. Vertical descents, precision landing points, maintaining functional status immediately on impact. These are things I trained for. They're in the body. They don't require thought in the moment, which means the only thing I'm using my mind for in the moment is the next decision. Which was, get between the reaching hand and its target. I got between them. He stopped. And now his hand stopped before completing the reach, which means whatever he was reaching for stayed where it was. And I said, hi, let's not. Which is something Webb has told me at least twice is a completely insane thing to say in that situation, and which I maintain is appropriate because it's non-threatening. It establishes communication, and it's accurate. Let's not. We're all going to be better off if we don't do whatever you were about to do. That's a complete and correct sentence for the situation. I think about the moment I landed sometimes. The chamber had been full of sound, conversation, translation feeds, the hum of the HVAC. And then I landed and it went quiet. Every species in that room, approximately 260 beings, went silent at the same moment. I wasn't thinking about that in the moment. I was thinking about the hand and where the target was, and whether Akafir had the main entrance. But afterward, in the quiet of the crew lounge, I thought about it. 260 beings from maybe 30 different species, all going silent at the same moment, because one human dropped 4 meters and stood up and said, "Hi, let's not." I think about what that means, what it says about what they were seeing, what story it told them about what humans are. I don't know what story it told them. That's for them to say. But I know what we were doing. We were doing our job. That's the only story I have. Testimony of Commander Rhett Cow, GCDF, Dorvian Contingent. Second statement, filed separately at Commander's request. I want to add something to my earlier statement that I did not include because I was concerned it would appear self-serving or overly reflective for an official military record. After the incident, after the formal proceedings and the security reviews and the diplomatic necessities, late in the station evening, in the officers' lounge of the diplomatic quarter, I sat with Staff Sergeant Webb. We did not speak for several minutes. We had both received the same stimulant beverage from the dispensary, something that was apparently designed to be compatible with most hegemony species chemistry, and it tasted of mineral residue and mild disappointment, and we both looked at our cups with the same expression. Then Webb said, "Your soldiers moved well once they had the picture." I said, "Your team had the picture first." He said, "Different kind of training." I said, "Tell me." He thought about how to put it. "GCDF trains for scenarios," he said. "Identified threat types, known conditions. Your contingency library is enormous. You can find a match for almost any situation." And human doctrine. We train for not knowing. We train people to function when there's no match. Because we've been in a lot of situations where there was no match. I thought about that for a moment. "Your history," I said. 4,000 years of human beings trying to kill other human beings who were also very good at not dying, he said. And the ones who survived had to be smart about it, not just strong. Had to be able to read incomplete information. Had to be able to make decisions before the full picture was available. That's not something we chose. That's something that got selected for. I have thought about that conversation many times since. Because what he described, 4,000 years of selection pressure on individual military judgment, operating under incomplete information, against opponents who are doing the same thing, is genuinely without parallel in the species I have encountered. The hegemony's major military engagements have been large and decisive, but relatively infrequent. Nothing in our history resembles the continuous grinding refinement that human military history represents. We have better equipment, we have more soldiers, we have centuries of formal doctrine. But they have something we've never needed to develop, because we've never faced what they faced. They have the reflex. Testimony of Archivist Velthana, Unified Historical Bureau. Second entry, personal reflection. I've been thinking about how to close this archive document in a way that does justice to what it records. I've archived events that involved empires, events that changed trade routes spanning 1,000 light years, events that resulted in species-level policy revisions. I know how to contextualize scale. The Karath incident involved 4 people. 4 people, a room, 11 minutes, and a situation that could have ended significantly worse than it did. And yet I believe, and I have the unusual experience to know the difference, that this is one of the more significant things I have archived. Not because of what happened. Because of what it showed. The hegemony had 60 years of data on humans. We knew their biology. We knew their trade patterns and their culture and their history. We had classified them, assessed them, positioned them appropriately in our diplomatic framework. We had built a complete picture of them. And then 4 of them walked into a room, and the picture turned out to be wrong. Not in the sense that they were dangerous or threatening. They were none of those things. in the sense that the picture was incomplete. We had documented what they were and missed what they did. We had cataloged their biology and missed their discipline. We had noted their military history and missed what that history had built into them, down at the level where training becomes instinct. Staff Sergeant Webb told Commander Rit Cal that humans train for not knowing, for the absence of a complete picture. I find it somewhat ironic that we, who had an incomplete picture of them, were the ones caught off guard. What does this mean going forward? That is above my archival authority to state. I can only record what happened and offer the testimony of those who witnessed it. But I'll say this, as a personal note that will be appended to the end of this file. I've spent my career preserving the record of what the hegemony has encountered, achieved, and failed at. I've watched species rise and integrate and contribute to the great ongoing project of civilization in this part of the galaxy. And I can say with confidence, in 60 years, Earth will not be an observer species. They are already something else. They were already something else when they walked in. We just hadn't looked closely enough.